Alright, so here you see David Ricardo, and he developed the theory of comparative cost advantage, which is the basis of modern trade theory. And his theory was so influential that it ultimately changed entire political directions in England. And to some extent, his thinking was a direct critique of mercantilism, which I mentioned earlier, which was the belief that trade can never be reciprocal, but is a one-way street. You can only grow rich if you export, and importing is bad. And the result of that historically was, of course, that European imperial powers were trying to get as many colonies as possible. So in other words, mercantilists believed that trade has to be naturally a form of confrontation. It cannot be a form of cooperation the way we look at it today. And that is what David Ricardo ultimately provided. He provided a proof that trade is a positive-sum game and not a zero-sum game. But before we go into the theory, I think it's interesting to tell you a little bit about David Ricardo, because he's just a nice guy and to some extent a true hero. So in short, his story is a little bit like this. So he fell in love with the wrong girl, then he got disinherited by his parents, then he became one of the richest people in England, but then he didn't become a dandy or anything, but he turned to politics, and he wanted to change the political course under which England operated, and he wanted to change something, and specifically he wanted to change the corn laws and introduce free trade to England. So I want to just briefly recount again his story. So it begins that the Ricardo family, I believe, they were like immigrants from Holland to England, and his father was a very influential and respected finance guy, and they were also Jews. And when David Ricardo was young, he fell in love with a girl by the name of Priscilla, but she was a Quaker girl, so not a Jew. So his father was apparently very conservative and apparently told David Ricardo that he cannot marry Priscilla because she's of a different religion. But David Ricardo just kept on marrying Priscilla, and they were happy and everything, but his father ultimately disinherited him. So then David Ricardo, by the time, also already made himself a name at the London Stock Exchange as a smart kid, and he also befriended some military leaders who at the time, so now we have to think we are at around the year 1815 or so the early years of the 19th century, and at this time England was at war with France. Those were the Napoleonic Wars. So Napoleon thought that he could conquer England, and so England was at war with Napoleon. And because David Ricardo befriended some generals on the battlefield and got some first-hand information about the course of the war, then David Ricardo heard that it looks like as if England is going to defeat Napoleon soon. So David had the information that England will emerge soon victoriously from the war with France. So now, before England could declare victory over France, David Ricardo was telling everyone that he heard that England is going to lose the war. So he basically spread the rumor of the opposite of what he knew. He knew that England would win the war, but he told everyone that he believes England is going to lose the war. So now, because he had a lot of clout in the London Stock Exchange, a lot of people, actually many people, were selling English stocks because everyone was afraid that France will eventually take over England and all the capital, all the machine and the factory and all the factories will be lost to France. So the selling off of all the stocks obviously led to a decline, a massive decline of the stock prices. And when the stock prices were really low, that is when David Ricardo bought all those stocks, and then a couple of weeks or days later, the generals came back from the battlefield of Waterloo and declared victory over Napoleon. And of course then the stock prices went right back up, and David Ricardo became literally one of the richest people in England. But even though he accumulated so much wealth through his stock market trading, he didn't just want to retire and live with all the wealth, but he wanted to change England. And because what happened is that after England defeated France, England introduced the so-called Corn Laws. The Corn Laws were a very high tariff on agricultural produce that were levied on French imports of agricultural produce. And even though France was the enemy of England at the time, David Ricardo wanted to return again to free trade with France. That was his ultimate objective. And in order to understand that, we have to take a look closer at the social structure of England at the time and the exact nature of the Corn Laws, but I will do that in the next video. So I'll see you in the next video.